Avis, cette capsule a été produite simultanément en français et en anglais. Notice, this episode was produced simultaneously in English and French. Vous écoutez présentement la version anglaise. You are currently watching the English version.
Hello and welcome to Stereotypic STeist. I'm your host, Guy from the other day. Some time ago, a subscriber to my channel asked me to talk about the first game of a series, its sequel having been addressed in an episode I did more than 3 years ago, one of the first God games. This game is Populous, developed by Bullfrog and published by Electronic Arts in 1989. Firstly, a God game or divine simulation is a game in which you embody an all-powerful deity who has influence over his followers and whose endeavor consists of nothing less than world domination.
By extension, we could say that it's a game in which we play a leader who controls subordinates, or who has influence over them, and who makes them accomplish certain things or tasks in order to expand his territory and develop his nation. In fact, as I pointed out in my Populous 2 episode, there's a porous boundary between a God game and a game of conquest/strategy, and for me an important distinction lies in the supernatural. For Populous, we therefore embody an all-powerful deity who holds certain supernatural powers, allowing his followers to prosper, aiming for the decline of the rival deity through the annihilation of his worshippers. Our power is, in this sense, proportional to the number of worshippers we have.
The story of Populous, the first of the series, is linked to Peter Molyneux and Les Edgar, founders of the British company Bullfrog. It's a well-documented story for which I'll only give a few broad outlines to illustrate what led to Populous.
After releasing some professional software, let's say, for businesses, let's say, and a few games, let's say, Peter and Les were running out of money. But rather than shutting down their business, Peter came up with the idea for Populous. The story goes that he was somewhat inspired by the game Virus, a shoot-'em-up initially published in 1987 for the Acorn Archimedes, then adapted for the Amiga in 1988 with some visuals made of colored tiles and a point of view that takes into account perspectives and not of an isometric projection per se.
If you watched my episode on raffles, you already know what isometric projection is, but here's a reminder.
An example of a game featuring axonometric projection is Sega's Zaxxon, published in its arcade version in 1982. The notion of isometry is that we abstract perspectives in relation to the point of view. Whether up, down, near, or far, the tiles remain of the same size, which helps speed up the on-screen tracing process. Isometric projection comes in several ways. It's not always a 45-degree view, for example, where the lines connecting the vertices are the same length. Very often we observe some form of squashing, let's say, as if we were observing the object from a lower point of view. If the projection makes an isometric angle with 2 of the 3 main axes, we then speak of a dimetric projection. When the projection directions of the 3 axes do not form isometric angles between them, we then speak of trimetric projection. For example, when a side face appears wider than its neighbor, which means that the vertex also makes an angle.
The main thing to remember is the idea that for a traditional isometric projection, the size of the tiles doesn't change regardless of the distance that separates them from the observer.
This projection is convenient in the world of video games because it limits arithmetic or trigonometric calculations. Simply copy and paste elements on the screen to create the background on which sprites are superimposed. This allows to simulate a depth effect rather than having a bird's view directly from above, as in some classic role-playing games like Ultima 5. It doesn't take much more time to draw everything in isometric perspective. Simply create a referential matrix to know at which address of the screen memory to paste any tile.
An innovation for Populous is not the use of isometric projection per se, but rather the change or variation in terrain elevations, for example.
Peter Molyneux envisioned his world using isometric projection. All that remained was to populate it with peeps. The problem was that even though these little people could move around, they couldn't escape from their respective islands. This is where the idea of raising or lowering the terrain with a simple mouse click was born.
And that's the basic principle of Populous, making the ground flat, so to speak, so that your followers can build dwellings or even castles.
Notwithstanding that you've watched my episode on Populous 2, I'll explain to you what the game consists of and its interface. At the top left, we find the world's map, so to speak. By default, blue and white pixels represent your followers and dwellings, and red and black pixels represent your opponents, respectively. You can click on this map to view specifically that part or portion in the playing area below, or use the numbered keypad to scroll. At the top on the right, we find descriptive or statistical information. The arrow indicates your level of mana, or spiritual energy, let's say, and it's spelled with a single N. This designates the divine interventions you can perform. Right next to it, we have a shield with two gauges. The gauges indicate the sizes of the populations loyal to each party. The shield's quarters, on the other hand, reveal information relating to a specific peep or dwelling when he or it is selected. I'll come back to this later. At the bottom right are the game options, sound effects, music, pause, menu, game restrictions, and message when playing against a human opponent. At the bottom left, almost finally, are the different available commands. The arrows allow you to move your POV in the desired direction. On the left, at the bottom, are the orders to give to your peeps. Just above are your major divine interventions, and not the lesser ones at the opposite end. Finally, right next to minor interventions are the quick search icons.
And above all is featured the playing area, which consists of a zoomed portion of the world map.
This playing area is essentially made up of a grid of 8x8 tiles, but presented in diametric projection. Each and every one of the entire tiles measure 32x24 pixels, implying a standard oblique view in a 4x3 ratio. At the start of each game are shown our first peeps on a more or less suitable terrain. The one who wears the Ancien cross or Ankh is our leader. As soon as our peeps find a parcel of flat land, they build a dwelling on it. The quality or even size of the dwelling depends on the land surrounding it and/or the presence of rocks or trees.
This is where we can step in with our fundamental divine intervention, ground leveling.
They can be lowered to sea level or raised very high, but leveling the ground usually requires a peep to be present on the screen, or an allied dwelling or castle, depending on the game's options or restrictions. By leveling, the dwellings are transformed into more massive structures made of stone rather than wood, or even into castles, as mentioned, provided that the land is fertile and that there are no obstacles such as rocks or trees. In the latter case, the land must be brought back to sea level to permanently remove rocks or trees before leveling it again.
But the goal is not to found a civilization and make it prosper, but to annihilate the enemy as quickly as possible.
For that, you need mana, and for that, you need followers, and for that, they need to settle down quickly, and for that, you need to be in settling mode. You could also play simply by gradually leveling the ground towards the opposing territory and see your peeps settle little by little, and this is perhaps the simplest way to play, to make everything beautiful, everything clean, everything flat.
But I insist, this is not the game's objective.
In the game, there are two papal magnets, and by default, ours is the Ankh. It so happens that we can change the location of our papal magnet. We can, for instance, put it in enemy territory, then order our leader to head towards it, and our peeps to follow him on his journey. It's a way of leading them.
In the absence of a leader, the peeps will still move towards the papal magnet. The first to reach it will become the new leader.
Additionally, when we have a good number of wandering peeps, we can order them to gather and merge. In this case, two peeps become one, stronger. If there are no peeps to merge, by default they will settle, that is, build dwellings or castles, all depending. Finally, the peeps can be ordered to be belligerent. This is practical when there are many of them in enemy territory. In this case, they will seek to fight, literally, but in the absence of enemies to fight against, they will settle, that is to say, build dwellings.
So here are 4 ways to influence the behavior of your peeps.
We then come back to divine interventions. The basic one consists of leveling the ground. It's the one that requires the least amount of mana, but it still consumes some. Next, we have the displacement of the papal magnet. You can place it anywhere as long as you have a leader. In the absence of a leader, the first peep to reach the papal magnet will become the new leader.
Otherwise, if the leader becomes a knight/warrior, the magnet is moved to the location where the event occurred.
Then we have earthquakes. This will cause noticeable changes in the leveled terrain and will somewhat disorganize the peeps. Just be careful not to cause earthquakes in your area. Then we have quicksand. This terrain modification only affects leveled or flat areas. The peeps will certainly drown if they walk on it. The only way to get rid of quicksand is to modify the leveling of the land.
Normally, quicksand disappears when someone drowns in it, but depending on the game option, it may remain there.
The next divine intervention, which is more or less one, is to promote your leader to knighthood. The knight will seek to kill his enemies and demolish or burn their dwellings until he himself is killed.
Remember that from this moment on, a new leader is needed.
Then there's the volcano, causing the ground to rise and rocks to appear. To get rid of these rocks, the land must be brought back to sea level before leveling again. Since we're on the subject of cataclysms, the next one is the flood. The entire terrain is lowered by 1 level. Victims can drown instantly depending on the game option, or you might have a limited time to save them by quickly raising the ground. Finally, there's Armageddon. The papal magnets are then moved to the center of the world, and each party's peeps head there for a final confrontation, merging along the way. This is the ultimate and quick solution when your numbers are greater than the opponents.
So much for divine interventions. Once again, their accessibility depends on your mana.
Regarding the shield that I talked about earlier, by clicking on the question mark icon, then on a peep or a dwelling, we see some illustrations appear. At the top left, we see whether he or it is on the opposing side or yours. At the top on the right, we specify its level of technological advancement in terms of weapons. At the bottom left, we illustrate who or what we are following, which allows us to follow his or its evolution, even if he or it is not shown on the screen. Bottom right ultimately depends on what we are inquiring. If it's a dwelling or a castle, we show its defensive capacity, as well as the stage reached in the creation of a new peep. If it's a peep that we're following, the gauges show its strength.
You can play the game without ever questioning all of this, but strategically it's worthwhile to at least learn about the enemy's strengths and weaknesses when venturing into opposing territory.
For the dimetric projection of the universe, we use a matrix in which the coordinates correspond to screen memory addresses in multiples of 16 pixels. The tiles are positioned starting from the top of the screen, then progressively downwards, taking into account any degrees of elevation and changes in level.
Nothing complicated. Copy and paste operations are done in a fraction of a second.
Trees, rocks, dwellings, and papal magnets, if the latter is to be shown, are also added gradually from the furthest point to the nearest. Then, at the ends of the lower half, again gradually, we illustrate the gradients of the terrain or differences in height with a cut of earth. Finally, once everything is built in the background, we swap the latter with the physical screen and position the Peeps sprites.
These sprites are small, measuring 16 by 16 pixels.
There are usually 2 animation frames for each, with 8 possible orientations. It doesn't seem like much, but on an Atari ST, each Peep requires 1 kilobyte of memory. Since there are allied Peeps and enemy Peeps, we double the memory requisition. There are also animated sprites for certain events like drowning, as well as others for combat. For each event on the Atari ST, we consider 128 bytes and multiply by the number of frames.
We don't have to load everything into memory at once, as the themes for each world vary, but we should at least load the correct sprites of a given theme, as well as the tiles that go with it.
Sound-wise, we use the aperiodic noise channel. Sound effects are generally short, but depending on their quality, on the Atari ST, we can expect 4 to 8 kilobytes of memory for each. If we have 10 sound effects, that represents 40 to 80 kilobytes.
This can represent up to a third of the usable memory of a 520 ST.
Moreover, unlike the Amiga, playing digital sound effects can slow down the execution of game code on an Atari ST because the CPU is handling it. The higher the sample quality, the slower the execution.
And we can't play 2 digitized sound effects at the same time. Actually, it's doable, but it's a bit complicated.
One of the fundamental aspects of the game, which we don't always think about, is artificial intelligence. So, when does the computer choose to move its papal magnet? When does it choose to convert his leader into a knight? When does it choose divine interventions against you?
Having already coded strategy games, I can already tell you that that's a lot of variables and algorithms.
There are few things left to chance. The computer's reasoning, let's say, obeys patterns depending on certain conditions, based on values stored in memory. Regardless of leveling the ground to make its Peep prosper, or moving the papal magnet to lead them somewhere on the map, the program will always seek to end the game. If its number of Peeps far exceeds the number you have, it can trigger Armageddon. If this is impossible, but its mana is high enough anyways, and your dwellings are standing on flat land 1 level above the sea, it can trigger a flood and end the game, even if you have a greater number of Peeps.
And so on, from the most destructive intervention to the most benign.
Even though the game is real-time, everything is calculated in rounds, so to speak, where there's a start, but not really an end. It's like a counter, dependent on the Atari's internal clock. In easy mode, the program is slow to react and favors certain divine interventions to the detriment of others. In more advanced levels, on the other hand, the analyses, plural, are very fast, which applies to reaction times. Decisions are more calculated, more strategic.
As for the different versions, the original Populous was designed to run on an Amiga computer.
Visually, it's very similar to the ST version. One difference lies in the sound aspect, notably because the Amiga has sound channels that don't monopolize the processor. This has a positive impact on gameplay, but it's really minor. Another version I also like is the one for PCs running DOS. Visually, it's very similar to the Amiga and ST versions, but also because of the faster 486 processors of the time, we had better gameplay. There were also adaptations for other computers, not to mention consoles, as well as expansion kits like The Promised Lands and The Final Frontier, which only add different visuals to the game. We'll have to wait for the release of Populous 2 to really enjoy a slightly redesigned and more polished version of Populous 1.
The game was critically acclaimed, and magazines of the time rated it highly.
Apparently, Peter wasn't sure the game would sell well, especially since some publishers were hesitant to release a God game, but the rest is history. It also set, the game I mean, a certain standard of quality regarding Bullfrog, in the same way as the Bitmap Brothers or L'Encore, to name a few. One minor difference is that Peter Molyneux was somewhat a star in the video game world of the time. He was the leading figure of Bullfrog. He was the one we saw on the front pages of some magazines.
I'll spare you the rest of the story. As I said earlier, it's very well documented. But what about replayability?
Regarding the gameplay, it's almost impeccable and Populous still holds up very well today, 35 years later. It's quite intuitive, not quite a PUAP because of the icons located at the bottom left or the shield at the top right, but still easy to learn. What adds to the game is not only the ability to design your own levels, but also to play by generating universes in a pseudo-random way by clicking on the conquest icon during the game and by entering a number between 0 and 32,768.
Now, some advice.
First, to quickly level the ground, you can click the left mouse button twice to create a small mound, then right-click once to level it. It's a quick method and it consumes little mana. The different terrains or settings have an impact on peeps, on dwellings, and on your mana. Deserts or winter environments, for instance, cause premature deaths compared to grassy environments. Additionally, it's not always convenient to build large fortresses. In some cases, such as in the grassy universe, it's with small spherical stone fortifications that mana increases more quickly. For the reproduction of peeps, unlike Populous 2, you cannot right-click on a dwelling to force the emergence of a peep. This is called turfing, and it involves lowering or raising the land around a castle, for instance, to reduce the size of the dwelling, to force peeps out to explore the land and build new dwellings.
Having done better, finally?
Like I said earlier, Bullfrog's team had the opportunity to push further with Populous 2, which for me consists of a more polished version of Populous, the first part of the series. So let's say that what was missing has been added. Perhaps I would have opted for more than a single opponent, a bit like in Civilization, although I agree that in this case it would be necessary to multiply the number of sprites by the maximum number of antagonists, which implies that if 3 opponents engage in a fight, it would have been necessary to determine who attacked who or to rethink the combat system. Otherwise, I would certainly have added a random universe generator, with game rules also determined randomly, where what's in favor of one or the other is also determined randomly.
This was today's episode. Thanks to my patrons. Seriously, it's been years and you guys are important. If you want to support me, it's simple and the link is in the description. Also, like, subscribe, share, and don't hesitate to tell me in the comments of your impressions regarding Populous, the first in the series. Did you know about it? If so, do you still play it? If not, would you like to try it? Moreover, if there are any games you'd like me to talk about, please let me know. I'm Guy from the other day. See you soon.